Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, I'm going to show you why I spent $1,700 US on this box right here. Yes, that's right. This little tiny box, no bigger than almost the size of my hand, is for this Montero, and it cost 3 times what I paid for the car. Now, if you're familiar with Mark's 4-wheel drive or Mark's 4x4 accessories right here, you know that these are transfer case gears. And I mentioned in a video before this that I wasn't sure if I was going to do these, and that's because they are so expensive. But I got this thing out on the trail, I tooled around with it up in the mountains, and it was starting to get a little hot, and it was struggling to go up hills. Obviously, it's got 35s, and even though I re-geared the diffs, there's just a lot of weight to move, especially when you load it up with stuff, when you load it up with gear. I'm gonna be putting a winch on it. It's got a full-size spare. Keen viewers will notice the roof rack. I will talk about that later. I'm gonna do a whole video on that. Right now, I'm just kind of prototyping something. But anyways, it was just not performing like I wanted to. I've run these transfer case gears in the Montero before this, and I really liked them. So this is all the stuff that I got. Now, this probably looks a little confusing. Once I get the transfer case split apart, I'll show you guys exactly where this stuff goes. I've done this before, but you'll see here, these are the 2.7 to 1 gears, and I had the 3.15 to 1 gears in the Montero. So this gear ratio will not be quite as low, not quite as aggressive as the Montero, and there's kind of 2 reasons for that. The primary reason is this is the lowest I could go. They're no longer making the 315 or 3.15 to 1 gears anymore. But the other thing is, this one doesn't need to go quite as low as the Montero. The Montero was really, really low, almost unusable in first gear unless you were actively climbing up a ledge. And so I want this to be a little more versatile, and so this gear ratio is gonna work out just fine. Between the transmission, the differentials, and everything else, it comes out to like maybe 10 or 15% difference is all. So either way, I'm gonna get these installed. So in order to do that, I need to pull the transfer case out of the Gen 2.5. Pulling the transfer case is a major job, but it's easiest to start right here with this shifter. This shifter is attached manually to the transfer case. That's how you actually are shifting through things. And so you're gonna wanna remove the lever. That way when you get it disconnected from the drive shafts, the chassis, and the transmission, you can pull it out of there. So I like to start here, and the best way to get at this is actually to remove all of this stuff. So you gotta remove this bezel right here, you've gotta remove this armrest, and there's just a bunch of little screws kind of hidden in there. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to remove all of these little plastic panels so that I can get to the screws, and then I'm gonna start removing those things. Okay, now with everything out of the glove boxes and out of this area, you can see one, real dirty in here, but underneath here, you're going to have 4 bolts. You're gonna have 2 up here and 2 down there. I believe that they are 8mm or they are JIS or Phillips bit. So I'm gonna get that cleaned up, and then I'm gonna remove those, and then I should be able to slide this out. Then there's actually 2 screws down there as well. They're very hard to see. And if you have the cup holder like this, then you have to kind of move that forward, otherwise it blocks it. So you get that, move forward, and then there's 2 more 8mm down there. So you got 2 over here, 2 over here, and then 2 down there. And once you undo that, you should be able to pull this off. Now keep in mind, there's gonna be several things connected. Ooh, and some goodies in here. This is a great time to clean out all the crap that gets hidden inside of your car. So I've got this set out of the way. If you have the heated seat model like I do, you'll have to unplug those. And then there's this weird kind of dummy sensor in here. Depending on what you have going on in your center console, things will be different, but I've chosen to just leave this kind of out of the way. It's a little bit of work to disassemble this, even though that's a dummy switch. But either way, I don't need it. Once you pull that out of the way, you can get this guy out of the way. That's for your parking brake. Go ahead and set that aside. And then you can move on to this section right here. Now there's 1 screw, at least in my case. It looks like there might be 2 others, and I know in the Montero, I think there were different ones here, so your generation might differ. But there's 1 screw back here that holds this on, and then there's 1 on this side, and there's 1 on the following side, and that should release this whole section. Then we'll move on to the shifter, and I'll show you how to take that off. So now that that's undone, and those 2 are undone, you can see this whole thing comes loose, and now we need to focus on taking these shifters off. So this guy right here, this just twists off. So it comes off just like that. There's gonna be a lock washer. Go ahead and set that aside, and this one's gonna be a little harder. So what you need to do is there is a way to remove it, but I think you can take this whole thing off without doing that. Let's go ahead and put the car into neutral. You'll need to step on the brakes to get it to shift. And then you want to shift it all the way back. And this is going to be almost impossible for me to do with without two hands. But you want to pull this back, get some of this stuff disconnected, get this boot to come off of here. You can see there's that lock washer or that set bolt to determine the height of your shifter. So you're going to want to pull that off. That's going to be a 14 mil. You're going to loosen up some of these wires back here, and then you should be able to just slide this off of here by depressing this and turning this sideways. Okay, quite a bit of struggle off camera, and I was able to get this disconnected. And I was wrong about this. The wiring harness is connected in the rear, at least on this model, and so you don't need to disconnect it from the front. And you can just squeeze this, and then you kind of squeeze it through here, and you're able to clear it without pulling this off. Technically, there's a way to remove this. If you get a knife or a flathead screwdriver in here, you can pop down this collar, and then there's some bolts in there. Mine's very crusty, and so if I don't have to remove it, that's going to be the better move. So that exposes the transfer case right here, this transfer case lever. You've got these 6 bolts. 1, 2, you got another one under here, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what you're going to want to do is these are going to be a 10 millimeter, pull those guys off, and then slide this boot up. Once that top plate is removed, you'll have to maybe pry it up. There's going to be this gasket and then, or this rubber boot, and then you're going to have 3 screws or 3 bolts right here. You got this one, that one right there, and then another one. And it's easiest just to leave this guy on, and they're going to be 12 millimeter. So you want to pull those off, and it's good to keep in mind that right there is going to be your transfer case breather. And so you're going to want to leave that attached down on the bottom, but you want to slide it off right here, because when you pull off this boot, it's going to want to come with it. And so disconnect that, disconnect those 3 bolts, and then you should be able to pull this transfer case lever out. Okay, just kidding. I actually ended up having to remove this entire plate, which is 4 bolts that are right on the outside, because the way that this is set up is these are just bolts that are going through those nuts. So that's a little bit different. If you don't do that, you'll have a really hard time undoing these bolts. I've went ahead and separated it. I'll explain more about that in a little bit, but you can see here's the top of the transfer case. Here's that breather line. Now we're done on the inside. Make sure to put your car back in park, turn off the key, and now everything else we do is going to be on the bottom side of the vehicle. So let's get this thing up in the air and start pulling this transfer case. Okay, now underneath the vehicle, we need to remove both these drive shafts. So the easiest way to remove these drive shafts is actually to take it off of the differential. So I'll pull these bolts, and then this will just slip out that way. And then I'll pull these bolts and it'll slip out this way. Before you do that, you're gonna wanna remove your transfer case skid plate, and you're gonna wanna drain as much fluid as you can out of the transfer case, because when you pull this front drive shaft especially, it's going to leak quite a bit. So I'm gonna get all of that taken care of, fairly basic stuff, and then we'll get to tackling how to remove this from the transmission. Okay, drive shafts have been removed. The diff oil is continuing to drain. And now I'm going to be taking out this center support. This is the transmission cross member. And the reason I'm going to do that is it just allows a lot more access to get to these bolts. So if you're unfamiliar, this section right here, that's the transfer case. It transfers power from the transmission to the front and the rear differentials. So this is the piece that we need to remove, and all the bolts that hold it in are right here. So removing this is not necessarily necessary for getting this out of here, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier to get at these bolts. So I'm gonna be removing these 8 bolts right here. Those are gonna be 17s. And then I'm gonna be figuring out what I need to pull this transmission cross member off the back of the transmission tail housing and get this whole thing dropped out of the way. Now, in order to do that, you are going to have to support the rear part of the transfer case. Later on, we're gonna have to support the transmission, and it'll be kind of a balancing act to make sure that we can get this freed up to get out of the way. But before you go pulling this, you wanna make sure that the rear end of the whole driveline assembly is supported on that transfer case jack. So let's get to pulling these off and expose some of those bolts. Cross member has been removed. And this is a great time if you've got the bushings to replace these bushings right here. They're gonna cause a pretty loud clank or pretty noticeable clank when you shift from drive to reverse or vice versa. And then this guy comes off as well. And then there's gonna be 4 of those bushings that you're gonna put on later. So go ahead and set all of that aside. And you can see right here, that exposes all of these bolts. Now I'm not 100% sure how many there are, but just looking up here, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And there might even be some more of them up there that I can't see. There's also going to be a dowel right here. And I believe that there's another one on the other side. I just can't see it right now. So those are going to be the bolts you're going to need to remove. But before that, we're going to pull off some of these things. So you've got a ground over here and a ground over here, as well as some electrical connections. This guy right here is gonna be for your speedometer, and then you've got this cable right here for your parking brake. Up top, you've got a little more stuff. What we're gonna do is we're gonna lower this whole thing down after a little bit, and that'll get a better access to up there, and we can see what we need to unplug. But in the meantime, I'm gonna make sure all of this is pulled off and out of the way. Okay, next step after disconnecting the speedo sensor, which has one of those little binder clips almost on the back. It has to go usually this way, super annoying, get a pick for that. You've got 6 connectors for the transfer case. So these guys, I went ahead and pulled off because they're hard to see. These guys are on that side of the transmission. And then if you come around here, you can see those right there. Those guys right there are gonna be attached with these. Now, if you just lay the harness on top, you can't really get them mixed up as far as which ones go where. And thankfully, they are labeled. They're probably a little dirty. So you can see this one's white, this one's black, and this one's brown. And they correspond to a white, black, and brown one up there. So that's true about both sides. But right now, we're just gonna pull this out of the way. Like I said, we've got this disconnected, got our ground disconnected, and that should be everything disconnected from this, which means it's time to tackle these bolts and start taking all of these guys out. They're 14s, you're gonna use a combination of probably an impact on some of these, a socket wrench, a regular box end or closed end wrench, just whatever it takes to get the job done. They're pretty tight to the body, and some of them have little brackets like this guy right here. But there ain't nothing to it but to do it. I'm gonna get those taken off. Okay, after several, I'll be honest, very painful bolts, especially there's 2 or 3 at the very top. I'll show you guys when I have this all the way out. After getting all of those out, I think I'm ready to separate these 2 things. So you can see I've moved the jack to be underneath the transmission, and I've actually just rested the tail housing of the transfer case right here. So now I need to very carefully secure this and get it down. It's gonna have to go up and back and then down kind of at this angle. Keep in mind, you're probably going to lose some more fluids. I'm unaware of if I'm gonna lose transmission fluid, but there's definitely gonna be some diff fluid that comes out of here. So just be prepared for that, and you don't wanna drop this. I've seen these cases shatter before. That would completely negate the purpose of doing these gears. So I'm gonna very carefully pry these 2 apart and lower this down, probably using a transmission jack, and then I'll get it on the table and we can take it apart. Okay, so it's out and it's on the table, and here's a final count of the amount of bolts that you are going to pull off, or I should say bolts and nuts. There are 13 total, and it's these 2 at the top, particularly this one that was being such a pain. There's a bracket over here. Let's see if I can find it. This bracket right here, very hard to see up here, obviously. And all of this mess of wiring just gets in the way of this. There might be an easier way to do it. I don't think that this is a sufficient access hole. So anyways, I can't really show you how hard it is, but I had to use a bunch of extensions to get up there for those 2. But now that they're broken loose, it should be easier to put them back together. So now this is on the bench, first step is to take off this front cover. Now I've already done it. There's gonna be 3 exterior and 3 interior. You can tell the interior because they're nice and shiny, and the exterior ones are on the outside. They're gonna be in these spots where it looks like they're gonna hold it to the transmission, but they're not. So you pull that off. It's gonna take a little bit of prying. Just be really careful not to break off any of these ears. I used a hammer and a chisel in some places and a pry bar and just pulled it apart. And that is gonna expose to you our input shaft and our idler shaft and their gears. So this is the bulk of what we're gonna be replacing. However, we are gonna have to get back in here and replace this output shaft gear, and I'll get into that in a little bit. but we're gonna start right here. These two things go in together. You have to install them together, you have to remove them together. So this shaft is actually just kind of hanging out in there. It's sandwiched between this plate and that spot right there. But you're gonna have to pull these Torx to get this out. So you wanna be really careful with these. Obviously, if you strip them, it's a bad time. So I'm gonna get a Torx bit in here and I'm gonna remove all 5 of these, and then I'm gonna pull both of these out as a unit. And here's what we're left with after you pull those guys out of this case. Again, you have to put them in and take them out at the same time. There's a little bit of finagling, but that's how it's going to go. You can't get one in and one out the other way. You've got to pull them both. So over here, we've got the Marks 4-wheel drive adapters. These are going to be the 2.7 to 1 gear ratio. And then these guys are the stock ones. And you can see here, they've got some bearings on them for the idler shaft, and then this honkin' bearing right here for the input shaft. And we need to transfer these. Now they do provide one bearing for you with the Marks kit, and that's for this guy up here. And I think it's because it's just very, very hard to get any kind of a bearing separator in there. You will need, however, this little clip, and you're gonna need to pull off this bearing as well as this bearing. And so the tool I'm gonna use for that is this bearing press, or this bearing separator and puller set from Harbor Freight. I've used one of these in the past. You can obviously get more expensive ones. This one is sufficient for the task. If you don't have this, they're not very expensive to buy, or you can probably just bring it to your local machine shop, or maybe even a well-equipped auto shop will have the tools to do that. But basically, I'm going to get this bearing splitter set up in here, and I'm gonna be removing this bearing and this bearing very carefully. You wanna make sure that you don't put too much pressure on this outer cage, otherwise you're going to split it. So it's gonna take a little bit of fiddling with off camera to make sure that I can get this as secure as possible and pull on it as reliably as possible. I'm sure you can get these bearings, not very easily. I do wish that for 1,700 bucks, they would include these. I know that they're expensive, but it would just make it much nicer to just press on new stuff and not have to separate it. But here we are. So I'm gonna get to jigging these up, and I'm gonna get to separating this one and this one, hopefully as safely as I can, and pull them off, and then I'll need to press them on to the new stuff. For those who are curious, this is what that looks like rigged up. I've got this guy squeezed around the base of this bearing. I've got these spacers in here, and then I've got this rod to push against the actual shaft. So I'm gonna use an impact, and I'm gonna very slowly and carefully pry this off. Hopefully it comes off no problem, and then I'll be ready to take that and transfer it onto the new idler shaft. Okay, that guy came out really easily, and I've got it mocked up here. I'll be pressing that one onto this side and the new one onto this side. I'll press that on in a press later, and I've moved on to the input shaft. Now I've done a few things here. The first one is I removed the circlip that goes right down here. It's this guy right here, this little retaining ring. I like to use a set of pliers like this. I've got a little grip on the side rather than the two kind of prong ones. I just find this is a pretty stout retaining ring, and so using something like this is a little more confidence inspiring. And then I've got it mocked up like this, and that's because this little guy actually lives up in there. And you can see I actually damaged this getting it out just a little bit. But that's gonna install into this with the cap side facing forward. And so otherwise it's just a straight through shaft. So I've got a little bit of plate steel here. This is about 3/8 of an inch on top of the shaft. Now remember, you're not reusing these parts. So you don't have to be necessarily nice to them, but you do wanna be nice to this bearing. So hopefully this will work to mock this up. Obviously getting it all the way off, I'll have to figure out something a little more creative, but this will at least get it started. Then I can reset this to get even more purchase on that and pull this guy off as well. Okay, this also came off super easy. I forgot that this is slightly tapered, so once you get it off of this surface, it actually just comes right off. So there's the bearing. Obviously, if your transfer case is full of gunk and it's been really beat on or something, you probably want to replace these. Mine, super clean, pretty low miles. These bearings feel brand new. I mean, they're bathed in oil constantly, so they're in pretty good shape. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna set this guy right here. Don't forget your retaining ring. I'm gonna go over to the press and I'm gonna figure out how to mock these up and press them together. For those of you who are new to using a press, you really, really wanna press on this inner race right here. You don't wanna put stress on this because it torques this whole thing and it can damage the bearing, so you might get it on there, but then it'll be shot. So you wanna press on this inner race right here. Getting a bunch of sockets or bearing press tools is the way to do it. Same thing over here and same thing over here. One thing I noticed about the Mark's four-wheel drive guy, this bearing actually comes apart, which is completely fine. Bearings aren't like a crazy amount of technology. Basically, you have an inner race, you have your balls or your rollers, and then you have your outer race, especially with these that aren't sealed. But to make this as simple as possible, I believe that these are symmetrical, yeah. So I'm gonna press this on with this guy on the inside. That way I have something it's not moving, it's not gonna come off here on the outside. That seems to be the orientation of the other one on this shaft. But I'm gonna press it on, and either way, I am going to move this retaining ring over here as well. So I'm gonna bring all of this stuff over to the press, get it mocked up, and get it pressed together. Okay, I finally got this retainer ring off. It's a huge pain because it's almost just half a circle. And so I want to show you guys, I used a bunch of different tools, picks and whatever. This is what I eventually ended up doing, is taking some needle nose pliers that could push equally on these sides, and I just pushed it in. So if you're struggling to get this retaining ring off, you don't want to damage this. I have done it in the past where I've taken these off with a bunch of picks and hammers and stuff, and it's gotten all kind of mangled up and it doesn't give you a lot of confidence. That's the tool I used to pull that off. So now that that's off, we're gonna get these pressed together and get the retaining rings back on, and then we'll get it bolted up in that case before moving on to the next part of the transfer case gear swap. And just like that, the bearings are pressed on. Few tips about this. Again, press from the inside. They go on pretty easily. These ones right here, you know these are fully seated when you can get the circlip in. With the one provided by Mark's, you can see I gacked it up a little bit here, this retaining ring. That's because the tolerances on this seem to be a little bit different. As you can see, it is fully seated on there, and that circlip just barely didn't want to go in. There's two ways to get around this. You can either very lightly sand this down so that it fits a little better, or you can do what I did, which was use a punch and chisel and just push it into that groove. So it is fully seated. It is going to do its job. It's just, I mean, it's gotta be a few thousandths, if not just a thousandth of an inch off. Make sure you clean this up really good, but that guy is on, this guy's on, both the circlips are on, and now it's time to reinstall these two gears into that front housing. So the gears are ready to go in, but before we do that, I do want to replace this front housing seal. These come in the Mark's kit. There's going to be one right here for this side, and then I believe that this other one, they are the same seal, goes on the transmission side. So I'm going to get that pried out. One thing that I found that was interesting is you've got this little like splash guard here or something. I want to be really careful of that. I don't know how it's built in, but you don't want to just stick a bar in here and pry up, because these obviously don't have that backing. So I'm going to get something in here and very carefully remove this, press this new one in, and then we'll drop these guys in. Another thing I'm gonna do, just because it's here, is I'm going to put this cap back in this guy. I'm not 100% sure that it's necessary, but I figure why not? So just use a punch and tap that until it is seated, and then we'll drop it in. So now comes the tricky part of installing all of these guys at the same time. This one's gonna go here, and then this one is going to sit like this, and you need to get this retaining ring around here. So you just line them up kind of like that, where they're not all the way in. You just shimmy and shake them, and kind of move them together until they're gonna fall into the housing. You can see right here, they're kind of off center, so they're not gonna go in. You gotta get them all the way lined up, and it's gotta go through that front seal. There it is, okay. So that guy's through now. It's got to overcome kind of the tension, the surface tension on the front seal. Get that guy arranged, push it up, drop this guy in, kind of work them in at the same time, just like that. So it takes a little bit of finagling, but if you try to do it separately, there is no shot it's going to work. Then you're going to put in these retaining bolts, and the front cover is done. Front case is all buttoned up, and we're gonna set that aside for now. And now we're gonna move our attention to this side. So this gear right here, this is your output shaft gear for the low range, and we need to get that guy out. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna remove all of this stuff up here so that we can get these shift forks out. It's a good idea to clean this up. You don't want to be dropping a bunch of crap in there, even though the gear oil is pretty resistant to a little bit of grime. You got brand new gears in there. You want to get this as clean as possible. So I've sprayed this down with an air hose, and all the rest of this stuff is pretty well caked on here. I will clean this in my parts cleaner before I put it in. But these are going to be 12mm bolts, and there's going to be several of them in here, and then you got to do some finagling to get this off of here. So I'm going to get those removed and get this pulled off. So we got this removed. It's going to be a silicone gasket. So when we put all this back together, we'll be applying some silicone here. You'll have to get a pry bar in and lift it up. And then you've got to move this little kind of retaining spring, which is actuated or held in place by this. You have to move that out of the way, and then you slip this forward off of these shift forks, and you've got it off. So the main thing we're gonna have to pull off right here is gonna be this shift fork. There's a roller pin in here that you're gonna have to punch out. And then you should be able to figure out how to get this off of this shaft enough so that you can disassemble all of these gears and get this output shaft taken off. Okay, I've reached the point that I was hoping I wouldn't have to do, but I do believe I need to split this back half of the case. So I've already removed the tail housing. It's just a couple 14s, and I've moved a few things out of the way, like the counter shaft or the counterbalance bracket, as well as the speedometer ring right here. And now we're gonna get to removing this stuff. Now, if you have the factory service manual, that's gonna be super helpful for reassembly. Otherwise, take really good pictures and videos, because you got things like this little shim right here that goes on top of this. A really good way to do it is to orient everything like this and take pictures. That way you know, okay, I took this off first, then second, third, fourth, and then on the reverse, you just do it the opposite way. So I'm gonna get to tearing this down, and hopefully it doesn't go catastrophic. One of the things I'm worried about is some of these plungers. You can see I've removed a few of them. Some of these have a little ball bearing and then a spring and then a bolt that holds it in place. Something like this. Here's your spring, here's your ball bearing, and then you get some kind of nut or bolt like this that holds it in place. So I think what I'm gonna do before I split this whole thing apart is I'm gonna remove all of those, because what I don't wanna do is drop a ball bearing. Basically, there's shafts that run here, and this is the shaft that I need to get out. It runs all the way up to this shift fork, and I can't get this gear out until I pull this shift fork. So unfortunately, I have to go all the way through and pull it out. So I'm gonna remove all of this stuff, set it aside, take good pictures, and obviously this video to make sure I don't lose any of those ball bearings. And then I'm gonna split this whole case in half and hopefully remove this half of the chain case, because there's actually a chain in here, and that will allow me to take that shaft out. Okay, I've got this thing torn apart, and I'm not convinced that I had to pull it off, but at this point, I'm not 100% sure. So here's that shaft that I was talking about. I managed to pull out all of the sensors. I pulled out some ball bearings, everything else. Those ball bearings are gonna ride right here in between, so that when you shift, it kind of presses or depresses the sensor, and so it'll kind of know what's going on. And so anyways, I got this pulled out, and there's kind of a wave washer right here. I left all the bolts in the housing. I tried to make it as simple as possible. You don't need to pull the circlip on here. You just slide the whole back half of this out, and then we're gonna RTV that. But I need to focus on getting this reassembled. So I've already got the oversized gear mocked up in here. And so if you're taking it apart and everything explodes on you, you've got a ring right here. That's a little spacer or a shim. I'll leave that right there. And then you've got the gear itself, and then you've got the roller bearing that's inside of it. Now this is a very tight fit. If you have the 2.7 or 2.7 to 1s, like I do, you do not need to trim. If you have the 315s, if you were lucky enough to get your hands on the 315 to 1, 3.15 to 1, you do have to trim this guy right there. It's completely fine to trim. It's an unused hole. As you can see here, I'm not hitting it. I'm just clearing it, so I don't need to do that. So I'm gonna reassemble this just the way it was. Get this guy slid on there. That's gonna be obviously the shifter for it. And then I'm gonna get the rest of that stuff reassembled. And I'm actually going to reassemble this front half before I tackle this back half. That way I can stand the whole thing up and reassemble it and have gravity help me pull it down. So I'm gonna get that thrown in, get those parts thrown in. I'll show you the order of those, and then we'll get this sealed up. Okay, getting ready to reassemble this. I've already got RTV on here actually. Here's how we're gonna do it. There is going to be a So you got the roller bearing going on first. Then we've got our output shaft gear. It's gonna be a very tight fit, so get that on there. Next up is gonna be this guy with the grooves facing that way. Then we have a big old snap ring on that end. Go ahead and slide the synchronizer on here. So it looks like this guy is gonna go on like this. That's with this groove, is a little more grooved on this side facing the front. So I'll get that all locked in. That is slid into place. Get my shift fork positioned right there. Ready to go. Get the snap ring on there. And then I've already got the roller bearing in here. And then there's a washer that goes in there that rests up against this guy right there. So if that falls out, that washer goes right in there. And with that, you clean both the case halves, sandwich them together with some RTV, and the front half is done. Okay, front half of the case is on, and I won't lie to you guys, that was quite unpleasant. Basically what was happening is the bearing right down there on the idler or counter shaft or whatever you want to call it, it's a press fit in. So when I pounded it out, I pressed it out, but then to press it back in, it's just not very confidence inspiring. So you basically have to line everything up and then tap it with a hammer, and then you're gonna pull it in using these bolts. I'm not 100% sure that that's the right way to do it. However, I have double checked it and everything is running smoothly. So you can see there, everything's operating just as it should. Slide that forward, and now we're on to shifting into 4 high. And so everything's going good here. It's all assembled, the RTV is settling. Now I can flip this thing onto its face and I can reassemble this back half, including all of this stuff. Again, I'm not convinced that I had to pull this off. If you're able to do it without, obviously that's just way less work. But I'm gonna get this flipped up and get all of this situated and then start dropping in the ball bearings for the sensors and the springs and everything else associated with that. All right, guys, the case is back together, and I'll be honest, this one kicked my butt. So I want to take a video here and explain a little bit of why this was so complicated. I mentioned that the front half having to press on, that was tough. But this back half, trying to figure it out was so complicated and there's no way to really film it. So it took me a really long time, and now it's back together. I've tested it with the lever. I know that it is at least functioning in theory. Everything moves the way it's supposed to. Once we get in the car, we'll make sure. So basically, when I split the case right here, there's a pin that's partially held in by this, as far as I can tell. There's a pin that goes between both shift rods for the 4 high and the 4 low. And that pin has to be put in really specifically, involving this first shift lever has to be in, and the second one, the one we disconnected for the 4 low, has to be attached to this back half. And you have to have it aligned just right, the pin slit just over in the right way to all go down at the same exact time. And if it moves even a little bit, it won't go. So the kind of rule of thumb with transfer cases and transmissions and all this stuff is, unless it's something like a press fit bearing, like I was dealing with up there, if it doesn't move smoothly, it shouldn't be going in. These things are meant to lock together in just the right way. It's really kind of complicated. It takes a lot of patience, and this one got the best of me. I've been frustrated, but it's all together. So I reviewed the videos, and you can see right here, I've got all of the plugs lined up. I've got them all lined up here. They're all bolted together. This is back on, the tail housing's back on. I don't have any other miscellaneous washers or bolts or anything else over here, which is always a good sign. That means it's all somewhere in here. Hopefully it's in the right spot. I think it is. So now that that's all taken care of, we need to put this up in the car. The last thing I'm going to do is replace that transmission side seal. I'm going to go ahead and get that figured out. And then I'm going to try to do my best to capture me putting this up into the car so that you guys know exactly how it needs to go. That side needs to go over the rearmost cross member, and then it needs to kind of go up and over. And then once you get it in, you just got to bolt it up with all those bolts, attach the drive shafts, put fluid in it, and you're ready to go. Okay, well, quite a few things happened there off camera. I was able to get it up, but this way it was It basically had to go up in one motion and it was super sketchy, so I didn't film it. But it's exactly the way I took it down. Basically, you get this front housing down and the tail up onto this, balance it up there and put it in. This would be a lot easier, obviously with the transmission jack, or if you have a buddy, you get it lined up, and then there's so many dowels and there's so many studs. You just feed those through, tighten those all down, and you're good to go. Right now, I just have it resting here on this kind of tail housing and on this cross member. That seems to be just fine for it, for what I'm doing here. I've got all of that taken care of. I have the grounds attached right here, so don't forget these. You got to pull off these and reattach them. And then I also have all of the connections up there, including the speedometer. So that's most of the electrical. And then the last thing is this parking brake cable right here. That's got to be attached. Front and rear drive shafts are in. Now it's time to bolt up the transmission cross member, which goes right here. Make sure it's aligned. It's a good idea to spray these down with WD-40 so that they don't get cross-threaded or just give you some more resistance. They're usually pretty crusty. So I'm going to get that attached, get this thing sucked up in here. I'm going to use the transmission jack to pick up the rear end, and then we're going to attach the shifter and hopefully take it for a drive after putting some fluid in it. And now that everything is installed underneath, we are back inside the vehicle getting this thing bolted up. So like I mentioned before, you're going to have these 3 bolts that go all the way through. You're going to go ahead and leave those in there. It's going to be these 4 that attach the shifter. And remember the transmission breather hose up here. So that's where it goes into. And then you want to use a little RTV on there as well. This is a great time to transition to using the white ball shifter if you have a red ball shifter like mine that is breaking down. My shift ball is actually okay, so I'm not going to bother with it right now. I might upgrade to a white ball shifter after a few thousand miles and see if this breaks in or if it gets worse. But that's a good point. You already have the shifter out. You might as well replace it. So the last thing I want to cover before I just slap all this back together, I'm not going to go over that because you guys already saw the screws. I still need to vacuum this up. Is that if you look at the screws that come out of this thing, there are 6 of them right here. And these 6 screws go into this plate, which bolts down like this and is going to secure this whole thing together. Now, if you notice here, 2 of them are actual screws and 4 of them are bolts. These screws came out of the middle 2. So it's these guys right here. That's where the screws came out of. So those just screw into the sheet metal of the body. These guys actually have threaded holes they go into. So that's a good thing to keep in mind, because if you run one through the other, you're going to gack it up. And so I'm going to go ahead and get all of that installed and get the rest of this put together. Now, another thing is when you put this in, you want to make sure that the function is working out, because even though it's kind of too late, you're in here, just make sure that nothing's binding and being weird. So this is 2-wheel drive. That's going to be all-wheel drive. There's 4 high, center locked. You're going to go up and over, and that's going to be 4 low. You just want to make sure that it can move through all of those. You're not getting any kind of weird binding. Obviously, when we take it for a test drive, we're going to put it through a lot more heavy-duty testing to make sure it's doing exactly what it's supposed to, make sure the lights work. But that's kind of the final step, is to make sure once the shifter's installed in the vehicle that everything is functioning well. So I'm going to get those bolts thrown in. I'm going to get the interior installed, and then we're going on a test drive. Okay, out on the road after knocking out this huge job. And the big thing with the test drive is you want to make sure that everything functions exactly like it did before. So I've been driving for a little bit, the fluid's warm enough, and I'm just making sure that the all-wheel drive works. So you can see I'm going around a roundabout right there. The tires aren't squealing. It's indicating 4-wheel drive, so that's working. Then you shift it into 4 high lock center, and you want to make sure that that light comes on. Obviously, I can't shift it into 4 low and actually utilize the gears I put in. But because you pulled the whole transfer case out, you want to make sure that everything's talking, the sensors are working. As you shift in and out of things, it's smooth. You're not hearing any weird clunking or grinding. There might be a little bit of sound as those gears kind of find their home. You've moved a lot of things around, and so there might be a little bit of initial sound, but there shouldn't be a lot. Let's see if we shift out of there. And there we have it shifting into 2-wheel drive. So everything's working exactly as it should as far as everything not related to low range. Now we gotta hit the dirt and figure out how the low range works. So I'm back from a long road trip in the Rockies where I got to test these transfer case gears out. We were going all over the place, going way up to 13,000 feet. We were going down mountain passes, up mountain passes. We were rock crawling in between, doing some technical stuff, nothing too crazy. We were just having a blast out there, and the transfer case gears were amazing. All right, so we're up here in the high Rockies. We're at like 12,000 feet is my guess, maybe 11,000 feet. And the gears work really well for this. We've been able to go up things and we've been able to go down things without having to burn up the brakes. I do think the 315s probably would have been better, but since they weren't available, obviously, you just gotta live with what you get. But also, I think this is completely sufficient. If I was trying to do crazy rock crawling, it wouldn't really work out, but this is the right choice. Definitely better than the stock gears. So overall, very satisfied with the transfer case gear upgrade. So these transfer case gears were a ton of work. I mean, you guys saw in the video, really struggling through it. Hopefully this is helpful for you if you're doing it yourself. I really don't like splitting cases apart. There's just a lot of levers and there's a lot of gears and pins and springs and all of that, and it has to go back all in this certain way. It's just not something I really enjoy. However, the results are amazing. Now, that being said, it's not perfect. It's hard to imagine what perfect would look like in this case because I don't want the gears to be so low that I feel like I can only rock crawl. But at the same time, I want them to be low enough that I can actually get out and use the truck. And at this point, I'm pretty close. The low range is totally sufficient for descending big hills. I'm not on the brakes that much. I'm not off the brakes like I used to be with the 315s. I used to have my foot completely off the brake. Now I still have to do a little bit of brake, but I'm not burning them up. And when I'm climbing things, it feels like I have plenty of power. I'm not overheating. The only time that I didn't have enough, whether it be power or gears, is when I was up at like 12,000 to 13,000 feet and I was trying to climb an obstacle. So I was actually trying to wheel up an obstacle. So I'm doing like real rock crawling stuff and I'm at high elevation. I just didn't have the power. Maybe an engine swap would help with that. But gears definitely would have. But at the same time, that's not something I'm doing every day. So for me, for the overlanding setup, this is completely sufficient. And I am very glad that I did it. But I'm even more glad that it's done. I don't have to do it again. So if you guys are thinking about transfer case gears, hopefully this is helpful for you. I think they're totally worth it if you're willing to get in there. Or even if you have to pay someone to do it, it's probably worth it for less wear on your motor and your transmission and easier wheeling. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.